We're live.
Good Sunday evening, YouTube land.
YouTubeland. That is the name of the country that they will form. It will be YouTubeland.
Yeah, when Google controls the world or whatever.
Yeah. I'll have Sheetsville and Doxton.
Well, this is the With Thunderous Applause podcast, a podcast where two friends with differing points of view discuss current events and other issues of import. I am Steve.
This is Zach.
And today we are talking about fascism, specifically fascism in America. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is fascism and what are the signs that the system is becoming more fascistic. And then we're going to discuss some reasons that's happening, or rather reasons or ways that it manifests itself, and in ways that we can watch it in real time develop. This is a very personal issue for both of us. It's probably a personal issue for a lot of people who consider themselves left of center, right?
Yep.
And so that's what we're talking about today. First to check in. How you doing, bud?
Doing good. They got the new guy coming in at work on Tuesday. They told me Monday, but they lie all the time. And then my wife pointed out that the next week after that is spring break for my daughter, and I was going to take that off, and so I will not be doing 2 weeks helping this new guy. So I got to let them know on Monday, like, "Ooh, yeah, I forgot. I thought spring break was more towards the middle of the week, but I'll do what I can in 4 days. Should be okay. It's not a hard job. It's mostly just like getting them set up and being like, here's all the places to go and the links and everything, and just use what I have made for you and be great."
Awesome. Everything's going fine here. Got some yard work done last couple days. Getting crushed by school.
Mm-hmm.
I saw red. I've been in therapy for a long fucking time, 2.5 years now, and have really come to a new place, I think. And then I saw red for the first time the other day. And I'm not going to go into super details, but it was related to accounting homework. And
oh God.
I was literally I couldn't breathe. I was like anyway. But I got over that.
Class?
It took a little while. What's that?
I said at home in the classroom?
Oh, no. I don't it's offered online.
Okay.
So yeah, and it was just a quiz. I wasn't interacting with anybody. I was
okay.
I'm gonna reach out to the professor and have a conversation with him and ask that he give us a warning that we're walking into a quiz that will take us an hour and a half, when every quiz before now has taken less than 20 minutes. So I went in at 10:30, tired, not really into it. I'm just like, I did the reading. I did all the assignments earlier in the week. It's just a quiz. I'll hash it out. If I get an 80% or above, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got in it and it was like, oh no, you it's due at midnight and you have less than the time I've allotted to you because you logged in so late. All the quizzes I've taken before had been 20 minutes or less for me. So I didn't anticipate needing an hour and a half. And that just it was a fucking spiral. Because there was no warning whatsoever.
Yeah.
Here to listen to me bitch about that.
No, we're going to bitch about fascism instead.
Yeah, we're going to talk about fascism, which is hitting closer and closer to home, unfortunately.
It hit me home a while back, or at least aspects of it, anyways. But we'll discuss.
Yeah, it's been developing for a long time. We can talk about it more in the context of some of these clips we got. Did you have a thought? Sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no. Just, we'll get to it. It's there.
It's there.
I've got a clip for it.
Conversation. There's a clip for that. Go ahead. Roll that beautiful bean footage.
Let's get to our first one.
We forget that many fascist regimes started off as democratic political parties. We forget that Hitler, the Nazi Party, ran in an election. Fascist parties start as fascist social and political movements before they come to power. So it's important to see that these tactics occur even in societies that do not have a fascist regime. All nationalism involves a mythic past. So you can say, look, we're Polish people who spoke Polish and were sheep herders, and another bunch of Polish people who were fishermen. You can talk about how things were wonderful when we were all Polish together. That's a fine mythic past. But then there's the fascist mythic past. In the past, we were great. Wherein did our greatness consist? In our military. And in the past, the dominant racial group ruled over others. And then the fascist leader says, that has been taken from you by the leftists and communists. They want to weaken our military. They want to weaken our greatness. Propaganda is ubiquitous, and everyone uses propaganda. In political propaganda, your main message is something other than the information you're conveying. Fascist propaganda is a very particular structure. It's based around a friend-enemy distinction. The political opponent, they are a merciless threat to your very existence and your traditions. They are the other. When they are in charge, it subverts the nation. So the structure of fascist propaganda is based on the idea that the other are fundamentally opposed to the nation. As Hitler says in Mein Kampf, science is only useful insofar as it strengthens the nation. Fascism is a cult of the leader. It involves the leader setting the rules about what's true and false. So any kind of expertise, reality, all of that is a challenge to the authority of the leader. If science would help him, then he can say, okay, I'll use it. Institutions that teach multiple perspectives on history in all its complexity are always a threat to the fascist leader. The center of democracy is truth. You're not free if you've been lied to. Nobody thinks the people of North Korea are free. The people of North Korea will vote for dear leader every time because they've been lied to. It's not a free vote because they don't have access to the truth. Equality similarly requires truth, because equality in democracy doesn't mean we all have the same amount of money. It doesn't mean we all have the same car. It means political equality, that each of our voices matters the same. And political equality means speaking truth to power. If someone really powerful is humiliated when they're caught lying, that's the core of political equality. So if you're gonna rip the heart out of democracy, you get people used to lies.
Yeah.
So I'll begin with taking issue with, I mean, this is made in the context of recent American political history. But like, this is not, should not be construed to like be like, oh, Donald Trump was a fascist, because something they said, which I feel is really important to point out, is the post-truth, or the unreality, I think he called it.
Mm-hmm.
And then also this kind of idea that if another political faction is in charge, like they're betraying the country. I, maybe tongue-in-cheek, had said I was deeply concerned about what I saw as the potential fascism within the Democratic Party, which I wouldn't consider the left, clearly. But I see the inherent fascism in both political parties in the United States. And that kind of idea that if the other person is in charge, then it's a betrayal of the country and its values, is deeply concerning, because ultimately, like, it doesn't really matter then who is in charge. And ultimately, if it's just two factions of the bourgeoisie who are competing with each other within our political institutions, then it doesn't really matter who is in charge. And then we're kind of stuck in this constant cycle of, oh, this election is illegitimate. Remember, before January 6th, there was Russiagate. and saying that Russian hackers like somehow fucked up the election for someone who like I could tell immediately would not be elected, just so despised in the public mind
Right.
for myriad reasons, right? But anyway, those were a couple things I wanted to point out. What were you thinking about that clip?
I just like the fact that he was able to, you know, step through all the different, you know, requirements for fascism, and you just start thinking about it, and you're like, oh goddamn, yep, they're all there, you know. And he goes on. I believe there's 10 total, and we only touched on the first 4. But yeah, the whole idea that without truth, your democracy's dead, and it's like, I mean, that's the case, then it's pretty much already dead.
I would
Because
agree.
we haven't had truth. I believe. What's his name? Stephen Colbert. He did the word truthiness, you know, and that was like a decade ago. It must have been, as I watched it on TV, and I haven't had cable in forever, you know, and the idea that your truth is good enough, you know, like your truth is it is the truth. It's like,
yeah, and what an absolute fucking hack that guy turned out to be.
You talk about Stephen Colbert?
Oh yeah.
I haven't watched any of the new stuff. I mean, again, no cable, so, but it definitely seems like he was just selling out and using his on-screen persona to appeal to both sides. You know, like I've read that there are, you know, if you're on the left, you believe that he is a leftist who's portraying a right winger. If you're on the right, you just believe that's who he is. You know, and so everybody gets something and gets to feel happy about it.
Well, specifically more recently in the light or in the context of the crisis in Europe, he said something to the effect of like, yeah, I mean, it's our national duty, speaking of fascism and this kind of like nationalist undercurrent to it.
Yeah.
It's our duty to fight the Russians. They're the bad guy. And like, if we have to pay $50 at the pump, that's the sacrifice we as Americans need to make. Because
no, thank you.
And then the joke followed was like, if we have to pay $50, that's a sacrifice we have to make as Americans. And I drive a Tesla, which is just so fucking tone deaf and elitist and smug. And I think there might be a clip in here that kind of goes into that. I think Hedges' clip towards the end will, about this kind of incessant desire of people that are in the center, the liberals, or what I call shit libs. Like, a lot of people call them shit libs, but he's just kind of like smug elitist assholes that kind of like are a caricature of a particular political ideology. And like, you know, like the South Park sniffing farts thing, you know, those people.
There's a smug over South Park.
Always. But like their failure to be able to communicate without being demeaning and condescending to people has created a real backlash. And I think Michael Moore did this kind of like, he did this tour during the 2016 election where he went, I think it was called Trumpland or something like that. And I remember part of the lecture that he gave, or presentation, and he basically called it before the 2016 election. He's like, you're all like ridiculed and looked down upon and not taken care of. And like the factories have been shipped overseas and you're working yourself to the bone just to barely get by. And meanwhile, all these people who have benefited from globalization and neoliberalism, like, you know, the tech sector and the finance sector, especially, that's concentrated in the coasts, are all looking down on you. You've been stripped of your dignity and your ability to provide dignity for you and your family. And then everybody's just like condescending towards you. And Michael Moore said, like, Donald Trump's going to be a big fuck you. And that's exactly what happened. So there's an element of that to this as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, he paid lip service towards that, and that was enough. You know, you just need to hear like, hey, you're hardworking, and hey, we're going to bring your jobs back. And that's enough to get most people on his side. You know, it didn't matter if there was not even a grain of truth to it, or that he probably thought all the same things, and that, they should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and, get a small loan from their father or something like that and start a business. It doesn't matter that that's what he really thinks. When he vocalizes something, that's all that matters.
Right. And so Jason Stanley, he's a professor at some fucking elite college, whatever. He's a good historian. He wrote a book on fascism. That's the clip was appropriate and well done, I thought. So that's why I wanted to use that. But he kind of touches on that. I lost it. Oh, the national, the Make America Great, right?
Okay,
and that's kind of why I cautioned against just saying this is Trump, because like, what was fucking Biden's slogan in 2020?
No idea.
Build back better.
Oh, yeah.
Or restoring the soul of America. Remember his first campaign ad was fucking Charlottesville, being like, oh my God, this like evil thing. And don't get me wrong, that shit's fucking scary as fuck, and that's why we're talking about American fascism right now. But like, for the audacity of someone who like participated in creating the institutions or institutionalized white supremacy through like the crime bill and shit. Like, I mean, white supremacy has been institutionalized, but in more recent history, like definitely contributing in a substantive way to the suppression of Black and brown and poor communities across the country. That was fucking Joe Biden. Right. So he does this ad where he's like, this is not who we are. We need to restore the soul of America. And I'm like, there is not a lot of daylight between Make America Great Again and restore the soul of America. You're still looking to some mythic past,
right?
Which is a gigantic irony, considering he was one of the people that like helped build the system that's oppressing us. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, what was it? The omnibus crime bill?
The 94 crime bill.
He pushed through that, basically made it so a ton of Black and brown people were just going to go to jail with very little opportunity. I mean, wasn't that around the same time that a prison complex like really got going?
That's precisely why it did. And neoliberalization, which started, really kind of kicked off on the reforms, neoliberal reforms kicked off under Tricky Dick Nixon. And then, but really, like, it was the no other alternative. It was the Thatcher Reaganism. But yeah, and then the privatizing, all that stuff, and then the crime bill made the prison population fucking explode, because they're like 3 strikes law and like all that tough on crime.
Well, and then once you've created the prison complex, you have to keep people in prison.
You can feed it.
Yeah, you got to feed that.
It's a machine that chews up bodies and then uses them as slave labor, because that's the only way slavery can be legal in our country under our Constitution.
100%, especially in California, where we use them to fight fires. A job that like is death, is just basically like waiting to kill you. Like, horrible system.
And I know we're talking about fascism, and the joke I made when I mentioned like Democrats are probably going to be fascist, it was specifically Kamala Harris, because of how big a sociopath she is. And one of the things that she said, you mentioned California prisoners, was that like, oh no, like as Attorney General in California, she fought against releasing, because remember the state Supreme Court a while back, I forget the year, was basically like, this is in violation of the 8th Amendment of the federal Constitution, because like this is cruel and unusual punishment to like have the prison gym be full of fucking bunk beds and crammed with people. You have to find a way to reduce it. It wasn't politically feasible to build new prisons, like, because they're a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're like, well, you have to find ways to lessen the population. And Kamala Harris, as Attorney General, was like, no, we don't want to do that. She fought against people's fucking constitutional rights.
Yeah,
because the state uses prisoners as firefighters. I mean, there's actually an agency. I applied for a job there, honestly. When I was looking for state jobs a while back after I got out of the military, before I continued in the private sector with air traffic. And it's called like the Bureau of Prison something or other, but basically or the Prison Industry Authority. But it basically
is on the nose.
Prisons in California, actually, like a lot of the office supplies used by various state agencies are made in prison factories. Yeah, dude, it's fucked up, right? But my point being is that like I guess to tie it all together is that like what was the response to the fucking historic monumental uprisings after the George Floyd murder? And it was the largest protests in national history. Civil rights protests or whatever, like massive protests everywhere. People burning down fucking, police stations and shit. It was fucking out of control, and also like really inspiring in a lot of ways.
I was going to say it was pretty exciting when I started hearing about, the right places getting burnt down. Because all too often,
I agree. Yeah.
My point of view. All too often when when you have the riots and things like that, it is people who had nothing to do with it who suffer, like the poor business owner who's got a deli and suddenly his deli is in flames. And he's like, I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I'm one of you. Like, what the hell, guys? And so it was nice to hear like, oh yeah, they barricaded the police station. They set it on fire. It's like, hey, that's effective. Congratulations. You're doing a good job.
But was it? And that's the point I was getting to. They took Kamala Harris and stuck her. She offered nothing to the ticket because California was going to vote for Joe Biden no matter what.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So she offered nothing to the ticket, but they put her on there. Why? For the fucking law and order agenda. They literally, the response of the political elite to these uprisings was to put the author of the 94 crime bill and California's top cop who openly advocated to keep people in prison to use them as free labor. That was who they projected as the people to restore the soul of America.
Well, and send parents to jail when their kids skipped school,
right?
Stuff like that, because that's definitely going to help kids get back in school. Take them away from their parents. Hey, I'm sure they'll do great after that. Yeah,
Jesus Christ. Fine. We could bitch about this for fucking ever. So maybe let's move to the next clip and we'll be inspired to say more things related to today's topic.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Bruce Grenzer is a former evangelical pastor turned atheist who lives in rural Ohio. He says that the spread of conspiracy theories like QAnon in the evangelical church has been a long time coming.
There was this increasing adoption of white nationalistic thinking, starting with Jerry Falwell and Paul Weyrich back in the late 70s with the moral majority, for example. And, so they birthed this baby that, when Trump, it came of age. They realized that the way to power was through politics. I was in one church in Southeast Ohio for 11 years. I preached a certain viewpoint. It was certainly we were a Christian nation.
Bruce preached fundamental evangelicalism and conservative values for almost 3 decades. But by the late 1990s, his religious and political beliefs had softened and eventually left him completely. But even though he moved away from the church, conspiracy theories still found a way to his family.
None of them are evangelicals, except for my third oldest son. Great kid, but was very non-political his whole life, never voted. And then in January of 2020, something changed. He has gone to a Southern Baptist church. He's told me that my pastor believes a lot of the same things I believe. He sees this otherworldly element working within the government now. When Biden got elected, all of a sudden, Satan was sitting in the Oval Office.
Do you feel like your son has been led astray?
It's hard to sit by when someone espouses those things and there's really nothing you can do about it.
That one hits home for me.
Go ahead.
I have a younger brother, much younger brother, 13 years younger, who went from atheist, teaching in the school system and everything, to now he decided he was going to move to Florida because California was too liberal and he wanted to live in a red state. And so he got out of here, and now he's like living in a compound with his wife's family, and just made life overall difficult. And we've spoken about it, and he went to Catholicism, and I'm hard atheist, and it's incredibly frustrating, because if you try to talk sense to them, they just dig in their heels, and so there's very little you can do. They got they got into it themselves, and you have to rely on them getting out of it, themselves, because otherwise you're just gonna make them stick to their guns even harder. And like that is kind of what is terrible about QAnon is like, I think not everyone obviously, but so many people have a story about how they stopped following someone on social media, or you'll like, oh, my mom's posting this thing, she probably doesn't even realize it's QAnon, but she's posting it nonetheless. She's just like reposting from somewhere else, and it's just driving a wedge in between families and citizens and stuff like that, which just enables fascists to get ahead by creating this us and them dynamic where it never would have existed.
Yeah, man. Yeah, that's heavy, man. And yet like almost entirely predictable, right? Like,
Indeed.
yeah. And so there's a religious element, but that, right, like, this, and Jason Stanley talked about that towards the end of the clip. By the way, we're always going to put everything that we show in the description.
Some things we don't.
What's that?
And some things we don't show.
And some things we don't show, other resources, because you can't get to everything in the amount of time that we want to actually sit here and do this. Mm-hmm. So like Jason Stanley talks about it towards the end. He talks about like Sodom and Gomorrah, and you hear a lot about that, especially, like, oh, these urban is just like a fucking dog whistle for black or whatever. Like,
or elite, or anything like that.
Yeah, and just decay. Like, oh yeah, this is the problem, right? Like, or it's immigrants, or it's whoever else, right? There's always somebody. And with the evangelicals, especially, it becomes very cultish, and I think Chris Hedges talks about that quite a bit in sections we're not going to get to today. But if someone watches that all the way through, about how fundamentalist religion, or dominionist, as I understand, is probably a proper term, which is this kind of like fire and brimstone version of like Jesus was like an anarchist that was just like, fuck it, nothing matters. Like, there's like, he was a prophet, right? And to take a religion that was based around this kind of message of like, live and let live,
standard wearing
one to others, the golden rule, right? Or Huxley called it the perennial philosophy, right? Like, and so you have a religion that's based around this, like, give to the poor, provide for them, hang out with the lepers and the sex workers, and all that other stuff, right? And then they took it and they made it this thing, and they're using it to drive a wedge between families. I live in the North State. I'm sure you have. I mean, there's mega churches everywhere, but like there's a particular mega church in Redding, California, called Bethel, which is like one of those mega churches you hear like Joel Osteen and shit, like in Texas. Like there's one here in Northern California. Do they like they buy the city government? They get all sorts of preference. They were a few years ago, they were giving like a huge grant, because they're a tax exempt organization, right? They're giving this big grant to the police department to buy like drones and surveillance stuff as a response to the George Floyd uprisings. And so you have this like relationship between church and state that we haven't had in a very long time, while without any sense of irony, they're saying we are a Christian nation. We need to go back to our principles. When of course, like everybody back then, it was socially expected of you to be religious. And I think that there was a lot of intellectual stuff that was tied to religion, and a lot of really important like humanist concepts were developed from clergy, right? Who were just thinking, and they were provided the time and the resources to just think and to philosophize. And so, like, of course, everybody was religious, but it's pretty explicit that churches should not be buying military equipment
for the police to enforce their ideas.
Police.
Yeah. We don't have anything like that I've heard of in Fresno. We do have Adventure Church that has purchased or is trying to purchase a building that has historically been a venue for events and for shows. And there's a lot of debate around it. Are they even allowed to do so? And so, of course, people have been, doing protests, and eventually, you had people showing up, from or on the church's side that were being agitators. And so the police had to show up. And in no time at all, you had the police just, chit-chatting and, laughing it up with, people from the Proud Boys and stuff like that. And it's like, that's not a good look, you guys. But hey, at least we know what's up. And
yeah, absolutely. And actually, Bethel Church did that in Reading. My understanding is that they own the Civic Center.
Yeah.
Which is like an event venue, basically.
Yeah.
And it used to be a public venue, and then the church bought it, and so then the church rents it back to the city when the city wants to use it.
Oh wow,
it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah.
But and then they're not required. Like I found this out talking to my buddy who does a radio show on water issues in the North State.
Mm-hmm.
It's on a public radio station here locally. And I didn't know this, but like apparently the Mormon church would have been, if they structured this new water district in a particular way, like the Mormon church would have been the majority vote on the water district because they own so much land.
Yeah.
And I mean,
they're real estate disguised as religion.
Right, exactly. Like I only have a bachelor's degree in history, so I'm not an expert, but like I'm pretty damn sure we fought like people like shed blood for like 150 years to get rid of churches owning all the good land. That's what partly what the Reformation was about, right? And like the emergence of Protestantism as a branch of Christianity was because the Catholic Church owned all the land.
Yeah, but America is rife for that shit.
Yeah.
Like we are so into freedom and stuff like that if you have the money, you can purchase something. And so churches just stepped in with all the congregation's money and purchased up a whole bunch of land. Scientology is another one where they're basically a real estate company that is, posing as a church. Yeah.
Right. And they don't, my understanding, I don't think churches have to even pay like there's an exemption for churches on property tax.
No.
So they own the city of Reading, which benefits from property taxes. It's like, here, own this so you don't have to pay property taxes. Then we'll rent it from you.
Yeah.
So we're gonna reduce our budget, and then we're gonna start paying for something we didn't pay for before. I seriously conservative government.
Yeah, I seriously need to start my own branch of the Church of the Lady of Perpetual Exemption, so I can get all these exemptions as well.
John Oliver's a fucking shit lib too, man. But that shit was
but it's still fucking funny.
We actually, so I'm in a leftist organizer here locally, and they came up in conversation just kind of like as a joke, but like prompted at least like a couple like could we do that? Because we're talking about shifting our away from being a member of a national organization. We're a DSA chapter, and we're thinking about getting rid of not being part of the DSA. And we're like, what can we do? And we're like, what about a church? Legit, man. We're the church of helping people. That's what we do.
It's not something that I like, but you could certainly utilize in America churches to get a lot done, or utilize a real or feigned belief in a church or an ideology in order to get a lot done. And my daughter wants to get snake bites, and she's not sure how my wife was saying, like, I'm not even sure that that's allowed at the school. And I'm like, don't worry, we'll just say that we're part of the satanic temple, and they preach bodily autonomy. And so they can't say anything about it. They have to let her have it because it's part of her religious doctrine. It's like sometimes you use what you got to use to get the things you need or want.
Yeah, and the Satanic Temple, you mentioned that, like, doing all sorts of stuff to like ensure that women have access to reproductive health care and all this other stuff. They're like, no, if you can say that you can deny it because of your religion, we're saying that you have to provide it because of ours.
It is a deeply held belief.
And and there's nothing wrong with, like, I mean, we're not going to talk about churches right now, but like, there's nothing wrong with using the corporate structure of a church and the tax implications, et cetera, and so forth, to advance, leftist causes, like to provide, women's health care, or it has to be connected to an ideology. And if your ideology is secular humanism, that's still an ideology.
It is,
right?
yeah.
Like, So anyway, on this subject, books have been written about Christian fascism, and also remember the revival of evangelicalism happened concurrently with the neoliberalization and the globalization that was experienced across the 80s, right? That's really when you started to get like 700 Club and like all of these organizations, religious organizations founded in like Colorado Springs. So like you have like Focus on the Family and all of these like really large, very wealthy organizations that can take corporate money and it's tax exempt. They do all this stuff and really became a political powerhouse. But religion is only part of it, because we do have friends who we'd consider atheists or at least agnostic, and they don't really care about religion.
Yeah,
who also fell down this rabbit hole. My mother is like, I would say she kind of comes from like an evangelical background, but she hasn't been really preachy and she doesn't go to church. And a lot of that is just because like once you've been around churches long enough, you realize everybody's full of shit. But she's still a devoutly religious woman, but she's not involved in like the social aspect of evangelicalism yet. She still, through a winding path, wound up essentially in the same place, right?
Yeah, and that's actually our next clip.
Oh, is this a mega church?
Not mega. It's pretty big, 1,200 members in Tennessee. But yeah, you hinted at a lot of things that are in the next clip. So let's go ahead and give it.
I did not know this clip was coming up.
You were prophetic. You were prophetic. Let's give it a watch.
All right. Thanks, bud.
Ludicrousness aside, the genius and insidiousness of Q is that anyone can be a part of it, and you don't even need to call yourself a believer. People can regurgitate Q tropes until the cows come home while still claiming, with a straight face, that they have no idea what QAnon is. Even Trump did that.
Well, I don't know much about the movement other than I understand they like me very much, which I appreciate.
He's up there right now. He's talking about Joe Biden. He's talking about Nancy Pelosi. Now, he says he's not hearing on it. But, you know, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, then...
People call me a QAnon conspiracy. I ain't no Q, okay? I'm not in all that nonsense. I'm a truth seeker and a truth teller. And I'm very calculated with what I say. And so I'm very aware, very self-aware. I don't say things that I couldn't fight for if they sued me. I say things that I have verifiable evidence or eyewitness testimony or pictures or a background and a narrative to. I'm a little smarter than a lot of people give me credit for.
So you have evidence of Biden being a pedophile and Kamala Harris being
I can promise you, if I say it from that platform, just like when I said Tom Hanks is a pedophile, it does not matter to me if people say Tom Hanks is going to sue you. I wish he would.
Why don't you show us the evidence?
I don't have to show you the evidence. I will when time comes.
So you must also know that this is exactly what QAnon says as well, right?
It doesn't matter to me what QAnon says. Everybody wants to paint you in a corner and say that you're a conspiracy theorist. The problem is the only difference between truth and conspiracy lately has been about 6 weeks.
But he's not wrong, though.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Please go.
I was gonna say he's just it's the idea that, you know, your truth doesn't matter. You know, you just wait a while, and, you know, eventually, if you say enough things, you might eventually be, you know, right. And then you can look back and point and be like, look, I said that, it's true. And like, but at the same time, nothing will ever prove you wrong. And so you're just always right.
Yeah, so it's interesting too, because a lot of these right-wing figures like criticize postmodernism, and I'm not an expert on that either, but my understanding is that, like, you know, truth is largely subjective kind of thing, right? Like, and there's a lot of validity to truth being subjective, right? Because we all experience the world differently.
Right.
But there is also, like, and I always say this, there's always a little bit of truth behind the conspiracy, right? Like, when they were talking like Pizzagate and all that stuff, and I don't know all the details of what exactly they were proposing, but like, I mean, that's a stand-in for an unaccountable, unbordered global elite, a transnational global elite. And sure as hell, when they're like, oh, these elites are engaged in this, like, of course they are, because the law does not apply to you if you're fucking wealthy. Right? And so you have a whole fucking island with like some of the most powerful people in the world all going to be pedophiles. And it was Donald Trump, it was Bill Clinton, it was Bill Gates. You now after the fact find out that had something to do with him and his wife breaking up. Like, yeah, I mean, she was, I mean, I'm not positive on all the details of that, but like she was in an interview and like was like, yeah, I was aware of it. And that's about the time we like split up or whatever, that he was hanging out with Epstein, and he swears to God he didn't like, go to the island or anything, but just by being chummy with him, like was already suspect, right? Like,
yeah, it was gross to her.
Yeah, at the point all these people are with him, he had already done jail time for sex trafficking. So yeah, it's not like, and of course he didn't kill himself, right? Like, was he an agent, a Mossad agent that was basically like had this whole like sex trafficking ring to like blackmail important people? Potentially, we'll never know because they took him out before he had a chance to squeal, right? Like, but even the court system, like with the Ghislaine Maxwell, his number 2 in command is a groomer or whatever. Like, even the courts are like, we're not going to release this stuff to the public. But why? And so that first clip, Jason Stanley, towards the end, he talks about that untruth and the curating of information and how the media and it's like, it's not just the media, it's the court system, it's the whole thing all the way through, is that like the very wealthy are protected. And what scares me about this is that they take that anxiety, that resentment, that anger, that like they're struggling to just like make ends meet, but yet here's this class of people who can avoid their taxes if they want, or in fact they can not only not pay taxes, they can get money from the government just for having the right tax attorney, right? Like,
right.
And they're looking at that and being like, fuck that, fuck that, fuck that. There's something wrong with this. But then they get brought into this stuff where it's twisted, where it's like, it's the Democrats. Oh, they're socialists. Joe Biden is a communist. I fucking wish Joe Biden was a communist. Like,
right. Yeah.
But there's no
things I want.
Yeah, you don't need, it doesn't need to be factual, because now information, especially with the internet, but like you can find something that tells you exactly what you want to hear.
Oh, absolutely. That's the beauty and the hideousness of the internet, is that all the information you could ever want is there, whether it's 100% factual or not. And you can there are certain core truths. Either someone is or is not a pedophile. That there is no in between. You just need to figure that out. And if they're not, they're not. Hey, that it can be debated, but once you got proof, like, that's the truth. And so the whole post-truth thing is just so damn dangerous and bothersome. That people are just like, oh yeah, all facts are fine. My truth is my truth. And yeah, I don't know. As someone who really likes science, I'm just like, no, there's things that are provable. That's why we do this.
Yes, there is, but also like research agendas are affected by corporate money. Right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
While the scientific method is a good method to try and maintain as much objectivity as possible, and you're regularly, if you're doing a scientific report and you find anomalies, you're supposed to try and be like, we need to do more research because we don't know. And that, I think, is the more important thing, is to just like recognize that like we don't know. We don't know everything. We can't know everything. But like, as a storytelling species, I think I might have brought this up last week, or maybe I was just talking to my therapist about it. But like, we're a storytelling species, right? We had creation myths and all this stuff. Like, we communicate orally, like most, old religions and old ethics all come passed down from an oral tradition through standing around the fire and telling fables and stuff, right? And so we're like wired to have stories that are easy to understand.
Mhm.
Saying there's a global pedophile ring that wants to take your children,
It's compelling.
it's an expression of an anxiety. All it is a story that like makes sense of an anxiety you feel that you can't explain, which might be like, my children have no future because of climate change, because this economy just fucking chews people up and spits it out when it doesn't need them. Like, and so these anxieties you feel about your children's future are then just projected on something completely different. And like, human psychology is beyond the scope of this podcast, but like there are elements of all of this involved. Does that make sense? Or at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. And what it is so often it's hard to voice what it is that you're worried about, because you just have a gut feeling that, for example, you need to be worried about your children, but you're so busy with work and getting getting food on the table that you don't have the time to reflect on it and really discover what it is you're worried about. And so when someone charismatic like this preacher distills it down and screams it in your face, of course it's really easy to believe it, because he'll tell it to you again and again, week after week. And I think the really insidious part of it, or a part of it, is that he gets to do that at a church, and he involves public figures who are politicians. And so it is by default political speech at a church that is tax exempted.
Yes.
And that is harmful to everyone. And that guy needs to start paying taxes on his church money.
I'm a big fan of just having churches pay taxes.
Yeah, in general, I think it solves a lot of problems. I don't understand why it's still a thing.
Yeah. I mean, they're just, especially if they're allowed to own lands. Like, corporations are not people, churches are not people. And certainly if you're not paying taxes, you're not a fucking person.
Yeah.
Because we all pay taxes.
Definitely not a voting person.
Anyway, there's so much to this. This is the Hedges clip. Let's finish up on the religion stuff, because he more talks about, we'll get to the clip. But I think that also like the right-wing brain is like wired for like authoritarianism. And I think there's actually research that backs that up. I don't have access to it now, but I recall hearing it in some kind of like, I watch a lot of like book TV, believe it or not. It's like a really great place for interesting information, because you could just listen to someone like at Politics and Prose in DC, like talking about like the book they wrote and like the stuff in it. But anyway, I think it was a book TV or something, or a lecture or something I watched online. But basically like the right-wing brain is wired for authoritarianism. And I think I said this to someone recently, but like I think that's why the left is so crippled, because like liberalism, like capital L liberalism, this kind of idea that like secular, humanist, cosmopolitan, like enlightened, intellectual, whatever, that is like, that is it's built around asking questions and not being sure, and stating things in a kind of reserved way, like, well, there's this and this, but right, there are these other confounding variables that like do not allow us to say with absolute certainty. Whereas like the authoritarian will be like, this is what's happening.
Absolute
and
truth.
I don't need to provide you the evidence.
Right.
I will provide the evidence if I'm required to by law, like by getting subpoenaed or like within a court, right? Like, but otherwise, like, I don't need to show you facts. Like, but they state it with such, not to overuse a word, but authority. They state it with confidence too. Like, they just say something that's not true, but they say it like it is true, and then they convince themselves and convince others that it is.
Worse than that, though, is that it's bullshit, and it takes 10 times as much effort to debunk bullshit as it does to put it out into the world. And so you could spend your entire life trying to trying to debunk like the smallest bit of bullshit. And so basically, by being allowed to just state things that aren't true and then apologize later on if someone calls you out on it or whatever, not holding their feet to the fire, we basically created a political system where you just say whatever you want, and then the people that hear it at that point are going to believe it, And since it'll probably get said again on the news, and they'll hear it on social media, maybe from, their friends or whatever, and then it's true. And anyone who says otherwise is the bad guy, Satan incarnate. I didn't show it in the clip, but he goes on and just says that, all the people on the left, if you're on the left, you're, on Satan's side and all that stuff. And so it's just very much that you just say it over and over again, and it's, quote, true. And
yeah, and I mean, yeah, and that's a big problem, but I don't know, man. It's hard, and like there's too many examples like if they're very, very close to home.
Yeah.
What's that?
I said, can you make lying a crime?
Yeah, and on the lying thing though, is that like that the problem is that official narrative sources lie all the time too.
Yeah.
And so we're stuck in this spot where like the truth is fuzzy, but if you say, well, the truth is fuzzy, that's not satisfying to people who are looking for an answer.
Well, and
yeah, go ahead.
Like you were saying about, the narrative brain and the storytelling, storytelling aspect, you're absolutely right that we would much rather hear something that is solid and something that is coherent than, oh, well, this could be true, but we need to do more research. Nice cup. Nobody wants to hear, wishy-washy speech about how things are. And then, of course, when someone says something and then they backtrack and they're like, well, further research has shown this. And it's like, oh, so you were wrong. It's like, well, yeah, I was wrong. That's what life is like. 90% of our life is about, is being wrong about things and then advancing, figuring it out, and then moving on with this new knowledge. And it's like, that is where the right-wing brain, to me, is also anti-scientific, anti-intellectual, because they want.
Mason Stanley talks about anti-intellectualism in that clip. Yeah.
Yeah. They want a truth, and they don't care if it's like actually factual or holds up to, a rigorous investigation. They just want it because otherwise, well, you're a wishy-washy person. You backtrack all the time. It's like, well, there's new facts. And so I took that into account. No, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, well, anti-intellectualism is like, we've been hearing this forever, right? Like it's before Trump, long before Trump, and my entire memory is like, oh, all the colleges do is like brainwash people like into like socialism or communism. And I'm like, dude, half of my fucking professors are like right wingers. Like there are caricatures. I have seen professors, some of them are really rad and some of them are kind of mediocre, but I've seen caricatures of like what they're talking about. But like, yeah, if you're in a gender studies department, dude, but if you're in the economics department, all of them are fucking right wingers, because not one of them is going to tell you the truth about the fucking system. My accounting teacher is just going to tell you to fucking do the math and like, this is normal. You just exploit people and make money as long as the numbers on the piece of paper are okay, then everything's hunky-dory, right? Like, and they don't challenge that. Nobody challenges that the private property as an institution, which hasn't existed for most of human existence. Like we've been a species for what, 200,000 years? We've had private property in parts of the world for 8,000, 10,000 years. And we've had fucking private property in most every part of the world just for the last 200 years.
Well, and it just became,
you know what I mean? Like, but then it's just taken as a fact.
Well, yeah, it became a part of the dominant, way of thinking. And of course, the dominant way of thinking bred itself out into the world. And it just, again, became fact. It doesn't, like, that's all it takes is just enough people saying it over and over again that, oh, there's this thing called private property and you have to have it. Otherwise you're a savage, and people are like, I don't want to be a savage. Oh, well, okay. Private property. It's like, oh, but you can't have any. Well, that seems unfair, but I'll find a way to earn it. Okay, good. It's,
yeah. And that's what's fucking remarkable about this right-wing movement is they've taken bourgeois politics and objectives of maintaining the system. And so you have people who rent apartments whose rent keeps going up year after fucking year, and they're at the city council chambers. You're not at the city council chambers.
No, that's true.
These people I'm talking about are at the city council chambers talking about how they need this city needs to spend more money on police to get rid of fucking homeless people.
Oh,
And it's like, you're being crushed by housing prices too. That's very real.
yeah.
But they're convinced, but I have my dignity. I pay my rent. And it's like, well, wouldn't you like to just be able to like pay your rent and have money for other things instead of paying 60% of your income on your rent? They don't even fucking question it because they're so fucking angry that they saw a homeless person pissing behind a dumpster when the city doesn't provide fucking toilets.
Yeah, homelessness in America has just become this thing. It's like
all around the world,
it is,
everywhere neoliberalism is. Yeah,
it is a whip.
Go ahead.
It's basically a whip in order to keep you in line, you know. Like, and the thing is, I don't think a lot of people think about it. You know, they don't actually get it into their head and rationalize it. You know, that you do what you do because you don't want to be homeless. You want to be like one step better than homeless, and you're okay with that. And it's like, if your boss says I can't pay you this week, you might be homeless. If you know, we're counting on some overtime and you don't get it, you might be homeless. Like, most of us are just a tiny bit away from homelessness, and it is like a subconscious terror that I don't think most people ever fully like manifest inside their head and are able to express. And so, yeah, like, that is just people that are poor fighting against their own best interest is really frustrating.
So yeah, that kind of brings up this kind of like the strongman part of fascism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see a lot. So that anxiety we're talking about, like, well, shit, like my life is really hard and I could wind up homeless.
Mm-hmm.
It makes you hate the homeless because someone comes along and without you being able, you refuse to look at the actual data and facts, or even just have a fucking conversation with an unhoused person,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, and they're just like, no, these people are lazy. These people are other, they're dirty,
they're
whatever.
drug addicts.
They're addicts, and there are a lot of addicts, sure, but like there's also a lot of like really mentally ill people. They're the people that can't keep it together enough to pay the 60% of their income.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a woman outside of the store that I go to frequently, and you know, she's just like, I would just like a chocolate bar, please. You know, something to keep me going for the day. And like, she can't like keep a normal job because her appearance, basically. And again, yeah, you know, she doesn't want to, you know, give away all the money and stuff. And it's like, sweet lady, you know, like I wish she could get a better or more help, but you know, we seem unwilling.
Yeah, let's actually do a whole thing on homelessness, because I have a whole lot as a advocate locally for that issue, around that issue, for a number of years. Like, I have a lot to say on that. But I more or less wanted to draw attention to like how that anxiety is then turned into outward hate for someone else, because someone that benefits from it, the landlords, the business owners, right? They benefit from not having homeless people around. Like, the landlords benefit from raising the rents, and the business owners like are then like, oh God. So even with the homelessness issue, you see this competition between two factions of the ruling class, the landowners and the business owners, which aren't always the same people, especially in a city where, like, you know, one building can have 10 businesses or whatever. Right. And so you have this competing economic interest among elites. Everybody else is just like, well, this is normal. The school system tells us it's normal. The media tells us this is normal. And what what fascism does too is, as Jason Stanley, and I think even this guy mentioned it, like, who is the first victim of fascism?
The least amongst us.
Not even. No. Before they could round up the gypsies to the homelessness point, right? Like, they were viewed as lazy or whatever, even though their whole culture was just kind of like, I don't like the word transient, nomadic, or unanchored, maybe it'd be a good term for the Roma. But like, you know, they were targeted. But before you can target vulnerable groups, you have to clear the ideological space for that to be acceptable, which means you kill socialists and communists and anarchists.
Yeah.
Which is just, you know, it's scary for me and many of my friends too. There's definitely some that when we do public events, like, they won't participate because they have so much anxiety about us just getting rolled on by a bunch of, like, you know, tough, you know, middle-aged white guys that want to pick a fight because communists are evil a priori. We're like, So anyway,
I mean, you get people talking about like, oh yeah, we should round up all the Russians, all the Chinese, and kill them because they're all communists. And it's like, that is no. Like, good God, is that your actual belief? I sure hope not.
But it very well could be. I mean, that's what people, right wingers locally, said about the homeless. It's like, let's round them up and literally, like, let's ship them into this like camp over there, and then at that camp they can work on pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and go through our program, which always has a fucking religious component.
Oh, absolutely.
And get them indoctrinated and then back on. I did want to move to this last clip because it's 7 and I'm hungry and Pretentious is rad. But
which of the 4 clips did you want to do?
Well, they're all good. The last one is probably the most important. Let's play the last 2.
Okay.
So the context of this is a lecture on his book, American Fascists. I believe it's on that book. Or it might just be a broad lecture generally because he talks on a lot of subjects in here. But and we might not get to it here, but to summarize the thesis, I guess, or the argument he's making is that, like, explicitly, like, American imperial decline has created conditions for this. We've already discussed a lot of that, right? Like, this kind of sense of the sense of unrootedness, like the narrative that we were convinced our entire lives growing up through the school system, through the popular media, et cetera, so forth. Like, that narrative no longer explains what is clearly observable with our own eyes in the world.
Right.
Like the whole meritocracy BS. And we were talking about the American dream last week, and concepts of work, but like none of that go to college and you'll get a good job.
Right.
And
that didn't pan out.
That didn't pan out for a bunch of fucking people. And like, that might have been true in the 1950s or whatever, when grandpa got out of World War II or whatnot. But like, that's not the reality now. And you can't expect to have a job because the economy is changing so fast. And I think that also happened in the 80s. So we just see all these things coming together around that time. Globalization, the rapidity of change. Like, human beings are inherently conservative, like, in the sense that, like, what works for us to procure, like, our metabolic needs, if that works for us to feed ourselves and regulate our body temperature and reproduce as organisms, right? Like, our prime objective as an organism. If that system works, then we'll continue to use that system. And the problem is that system is no longer delivering for more and more and more people, right? Like, half the country is fucking broke, right? Like, and so since that system is no longer working, you now have kind of a backlash to the people it's working for, which is how you get the rural, urban, interior, coast split in the United States, and all these other social factors. The culture wars, so to speak, is really just resentment towards those succeeding in a system that is fundamentally different than what it was 30 years ago.
Well, yeah, I remember when my dad was getting into the workplace, it was, hey, we need you to have a high school degree because those were rare. And then those became common. And so they moved the goalposts and they said, now you need a college degree, at least a 2-year college degree, and then those became common. 4-year, those became common. Now you got to have a PhD to work at McDonald's, it's all that sort of stuff. Let's get to that clip though, because your camera is breaking up.
Is it really?
Yeah, you're in the red right now. It's all right though.
The expansion of empire beyond the capacity of the homeland to sustain the maintenance and costs of empire makes the system vulnerable, especially during a financial crisis. States that do not administer empires are able to devote more of their resources to domestic prosperity and basic security. But empires have no such option. And when revenues shrink, empires fracture and disintegrate. Without the financing that arises almost organically inside a sovereign nation, empires are famously predatory in their relentless hunt for plunder or profit. Witness the Atlantic slave trade, Belgium's rubber lust in the Congo, British India's opium commerce, the Third Reich's rape of Europe, or the Soviet exploitation of Eastern Europe, McCoy writes. So delicate is their ecology of power that when things start to go truly wrong, empires regularly unravel with unholy speed. Just a year for Portugal, 2 years for the Soviet Union, 8 years for France, 11 years for the Ottomans, 17 for Great Britain, and in all likelihood, just 27 years for the United States, counting from the crucial year 2003. The loss of the dollar as the global reserve currency will instantly make it impossible for the United States to pay for its huge deficits by selling depressed Treasury bonds. There will be a massive rise in the cost of imports. Unemployment will explode. Domestic clashes over what McCoy calls insubstantial issues will fuel a dangerous hypernationalism that could morph into an American fascism. The nihilism and rage sweeping across the globe are not generated by warped ideologies or medieval religious beliefs. These destructive forces have their roots in the obliterating of social, cultural, and religious traditions by modernization and the consumer society. The disastrous attempts by the United States to carry out regime change, often through coups and wars, and the utopian neoliberal ideology that has concentrated wealth in the hands of a tiny cabal of corrupt global oligarchs. The rage is directed at discredited elites.
Hello. Can't hear you. You got to unmute.
Appreciate you.
There you go. That's what I'm here for.
No, that shit's, he's just such a fucking powerful speaker, man. Like, and it's just like I've been in this like collapsnik like reality for like since I ever like I read what's that?
Collapsnik.
That's what we call ourselves.
Yeah.
But like I fell down the rabbit hole that was like 2011. I got a copy of James Howard Kunstler's The Geography of Nowhere, which is about suburbia. I got that from the free library at Occupy K Street in Washington, D.C. I spent a week down there with them. Pretty radical experience. Also, yeah, complicated. Anyway, like, you know, I kind of like came to this realization that the empire was collapsing. He mentioned the petrodollar. We still have yet to do a show on oil, but like people don't fucking understand that and like what that means. Like none, I mean, we're all, there's this like entire like subtext of imperial overreach and ecological overshoot that's like causing the system to break down in many predictive ways, but also unpredictable ways, right? Like, or unpredictable, sorry, some predictable, some unpredictable. But like there's this whole you know, this anxiety that's built around that. We were talking about it before the clip, and of course I've actually watched this particular lecture like 3 times. This was my 3rd time going through it to put some timestamps on it.
Yeah.
But like, so I'm very familiar with it. But like, there's just like this massive anxiety, and no one really understands the subtext. They brought that up at a meeting the other day. I mentioned the DSA's having conversation about leaving national chapter. Our local is, and this is what I brought to the group. This is what I offered, was like, you know, I think that it's important to build an institution that's focused on preparing for and lessening the blow of this, because I don't think people understand. They're just starting to feel it, right? When gasoline hits 200 fucking bucks a barrel, like when oil reaches 200 bucks a barrel and gasoline is $12, you know, 12 bucks a gallon, like people will go hungry because we've built an environment that requires non-renewable resources to fucking function.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like no one that like you hear all this shit, and every time it's like, oh, look at all these brave Disney protesters that are out protesting Disney giving money to these bigoted politicians in Florida. And I'm like, that's fucking cool, but do you realize that that's part of the fucking propaganda machine? You're being told that this is important because this is what they're showing you. And is it important? Sure, it's important that people want to stand up for their fucking LGBTQIA allies, right? that is inspiring and it is important, and that is a vulnerable group that deserves, our attention and our protection. But like, where is the context of like the fact that the reason Disney gives to those politicians because Disney is a very, very, very substantial landlord in the state of Florida, right? So, okay, now Disney has to walk back and be like, we don't agree with their politics on this, but Disney doesn't give a fuck what their politics are on that. Like,
No.
Disney cares that they're not going to pay as much in taxes, right?
Yeah.
Like, but we create these distractions, especially around identity politics and the culture wars, that completely obfuscates the economic pressure, the crushing economic anxiety in this country. That economic anxiety that's at its heart is due to ecological overshoot and the collapse of an empire. We've been used to it, and this is why I always harp on boomers and shit. It's because you literally don't know. Your entire existence was the golden age of the United States. Like, you don't feel the same pressure because you're looking at your watch being like, I'm going to kick the fucking can in the next 5, maybe 8 years or whatever. So you don't really fucking care. You're just here to write it out. And all of us are looking at half, I have
hopefully 30 years.
Yeah. I have maybe 25, 30 years left in me.
Mm-hmm.
And then even my children who have their entire lives, essentially, both of them are under 10. What world are they inheriting? It's really fucking the rage is palpable, I guess is what I was getting at.
Well, it's so much closer to home, the younger you are, because you are going to go through, you are going to see this. And I don't know why it's so hard for people who are closer to death to take a step back and think about someone other than themselves for a moment. And it's kind of greedy.
Well, and I don't want to say there's a lot of selfless people or less selfish people, but it doesn't matter because it's just the reality of your demographic. You didn't choose to be born in 1948 or 1952 or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
You didn't choose to grow up with the imperial wealth pumping full bore, and abundant cheap oil to fuel a fucking bonanza of consumption that is turned large parts of the living planet into a fucking wasteland. You didn't choose to be around in that time, and the cultural norms were all about it, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, looking over your fence, the little black and white, leave it to beaver bullshit.
Yeah.
The Smiths got a new lawnmower. We should go down to the department store and buy ourselves a new lawnmower too.
Yeah,
so we can wave at each other over the fence while we mow our fucking lawns that do no good.
Yeah. And with no thought to the fact that your current one works just fine. Did you really need that? Why do you have all this grass? Is it so your kids can play on it? No, your dogs poop on that grass. You're probably not even letting your kids play on it.
Yeah, we've complained about grass on this pod. This will be the
lot. Yeah,
we hate lawns podcast. I think we also talked about in planned obsolescence, not really planned obsolescence, but I think we mentioned the cash for clunkers, right? How
we did, yes.
Yeah, it's same thing, right? Tastes, right? The whole Madison Fifth Avenue, whatever, this movement or whatever in advertising, right? Where they're oh, this was even I think this was in the 19 teens or so. Industrial capitalist production was very, very efficient. And so they always had a problem of producing more than people can buy. So how do you get around that? You fucking propagandize people, convince, and I see ads still to this day where it's oh, you don't know the way you feel, that it you should have Bluebell cheese wheels or whatever, Jesus Christ, it's gonna fill an emptiness in your life.
That is a fine point. Yeah. The ever moving, goalpost again for our happiness based upon, what brand it is you're consuming.
For real.
Or if you have the newest one, do you have an iPhone 13? If not, you're a loser.
You're a loser. You want to play the second half of this?
Your wife's gonna leave. Right on. Let's do it.
She likes new iPhones.
She does. Yours is old. She needs 16, megapixels.
The wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon called them, have been shorn of any ideological or cultural cohesion. They are cut off from their past. They live in crushing poverty, numbing alienation, hopelessness, and often terror. Mass culture feeds them the tawdry, the violent, the salacious, and the ridiculous. And they are rising up against the forces of modernization, driven by an atavistic fury to destroy the technocratic world that condemns them. This rage is expressed in many forms: Hindu nationalism, proto-fascism, jihadism, the Christian right, anarchic violence, and other beliefs. But the various forms of resistance spring from the same deep wells of global despair. And this resentment is fueling a virulent nationalism, xenophobia, chauvinism, and violence, poisoning the civil discourse and fueling an assault on basic civil liberties. Yet Western elites, rather than accept their responsibility for the global anarchy, self-servingly define the clash as one between the values of the enlightened West and medieval barbarians. They see in the extreme nationalists, religious fundamentalists, and jihadists an inchoate and inexplicable irrationality that can only be quelled with force.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of already touched on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. The loss of culture, though. What do you think he means by that?
What was the context?
It was at the very beginning. He stated that there was a loss of culture, and it kind of, I think he was getting at how it kind of leaves everybody with nothing to fall back on.
So I don't know. In my readings, like in some of the international relations literature, like it's basically kind of like there's like several like sources of identity. And like neoliberal capital kind of like homogenizes us, right? Like, and kind of strips us of our individuality while telling us that like we need other things to make us individual. We were just talking about products, right? Like senses of fashion, like, and that's totally fine. Like decorating your body is very human. I mean, they didn't choose it, but birds have decorated their bodies through evolution, right? Like, so, there's nothing wrong with decorating your body, but like it kind of like, consumerism as identity, or I drive the big fucking lifted pickup truck with a big tailpipe that blows freaking black soot on everybody. Like that's part of my identity. Or I go to the rodeo and I drink big plastic cups of Bud Light or whatever. Like we kind of seek these things, and I think what he says when like the lack of culture or culture being crushed is it like there's a global economic order that like suppresses anything that doesn't serve its end. And so a lot of the things that we can find pride in is like, and my old roommate, which because that's how we met each other, he once said that white people have no culture. And this is as a Chicano man, right?
Yeah.
Like, white people have no culture. And I was like, I do have a culture. Like, I just don't like, and it's okay that I have a culture. It's just, you don't see it because you're looking at culture through like an ethnic lens, like a quinceañera, or like, you know what I mean? Like, these kind of like rites of passages and other things like that. Well, we had those. It was called you drag a keg down to the river and you get hella smashed and try and hook up with fucking any chick that's there because that's all you got. Like you live up in the mountains. There's not a lot of them.
Three of them.
There's all three. You try and hook up with all three. But anyway, like I think that's maybe what he's getting at. I'm not positive, there's definitely kind of an element of identity. And I mentioned like the big trucks and the American flag. Like, that's not always like originating from like, oh my God, I will do everything. I will die for this country. I will kill for this country.
Mhm.
A lot of it is literally just an aesthetic. It's
Right.
and so we cling to these things rather than just being an individual. When you ask most people, or when most people like, they'll preface their politics with, well, I'm a conservative, so
Mm.
that's an identity they've created around like the way they think, and then it's hard to break out of that because like you surround yourself with in your social group to feel that kind of, you know, sense of belonging that's important to our psychological well-being is
Okay.
built around that. Does that
So
make sense?
yeah, and so it'd be very similar to how people who like leave a religion or a particular church might find themselves with no social support or anything like that. And so
Mhm.
what do they turn to for meaning after that? And
I mean, depression, a lot of suicide, a
booze.
lot of alcoholism.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing, right? With people who've been stripped of their dignity because they lost their job and their housing, you know, and then they wind up on the streets, and then they turn to substance abuse to kind of just like numb the pain. And what else are you going to do? If I would do
Right. If you were on the streets, yeah, I'd probably want to do drugs too.
Yeah, I mean,
I
shit,
want
if
to do
I had
drugs
nothing to do all
anyway.
day, like I could see myself drinking all day.
Yeah, but I want to do
I mean,
drugs
I'm a
anyway.
little, I've matured past that.
Yeah.
Because there was a time when I probably drank most of the day, but like, I've never been a pop up first thing out of bed and crack a beer person, though. I've never been.
No, the beer's already open from last night. You just reach over.
And still, even then, no.
No.
No. And I had a friend, we'd go out and work on the farm, and he'd be like, oh, you want some wine? And I'm like, bro, it's like fucking 9:30. So tips the bottle up, and I'm like, no, dude, I have a hard, like, that's just part of me trying to be responsible. It's like, I don't generally have a drink before 7. If I went out to like lunch or something, like when you came to visit and we were out having sandwiches, it was like 2 PM. I think I had a glass of beer, but like, yeah, I generally keep my drinking towards the evenings.
Yeah. And you know, our friend wasn't entirely wrong about, you know, white people not having culture, because like I'm not Irish American, I'm not German American, I'm not British American. I'm American. I'm white American. I like literally have no connection to any European culture. It wasn't taught to me, and I don't care to reclaim it. You know, I don't want to. I'm not one of those 23andMe people that wants to find out, you know, where I came from and
which dead people do you belong to.
Exactly. I don't want to like reclaim my past and be like, oh, look at all the glory I had in the past. Like it's of no interest to me. And so like, yeah, I literally have no culture except that which I form myself. I don't have a religion, so I don't have any built-in culture there, you know. So it's just, for me, my culture is whatever I choose to make it. I don't have a big old, you know, I don't have a big old truck, but I do have a fast ass computer, you know, and I find, you know, I find fulfillment in that. And it's actually, you know, to me, it's a useful thing. And, you know, helps me do this sort of thing. And so I find culture, I kind of make my own culture because I don't have any.
I think it exists in subtle ways that you're unaware of. Like, because I mean, culture is just like a set of like norms, expectations, and behaviors that we might. I mean, it's a culture to brush your teeth and shower every day.
I did grow up in the Valley, so I got that going for me.
But not the San Fernando Valley. You grew up in the Central Valley.
Yeah. Wherever my hometown is. I don't know.
See, I didn't do dirt bikes. I didn't have guns. I didn't have like, you know, a lot of the things that people around me had. Like we had the river. That was part of my culture. That's why I call myself a hippie Billy, because I was a hillbilly, but I was a hippie. So like we're the guy people wearing Birkenstocks and tie dye and going down to the river and fishing or smoking weed or whatever, right? Just like hanging out. So I mean, that's a culture, right? They always say subcultures, right? People that listen to EDM is a culture. You go into like, if I went into like a rave or something, like, and people are listening, everybody's like, oh my God, you don't know this guy, he's the greatest. And it's like, oh my God, someone sees a t-shirt and they're like, I love that band. Oh my God. It's like, everybody's got their own thing. And I think
true,
we were talking about religion earlier. Everybody just needs to be a little bit more like Jesus, man. Just like fucking whatever. If that floats your boat, that's fine. You know,
Yeah.
like I'm not into it. Don't ask me to be into it. But like,
Yeah,
cool.
that's the most important thing is like keep it to your damn self.
Yeah. Religion is like your penis. It's okay that you have it and that you're proud of it, but don't stick it in my kid's face.
Yeah.
You've seen that bumper sticker.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fucking classic. Is there another clip of this, or are we about done?
That was the third and the fourth clip. I mean,
Okay,
we
great.
could go
No,
back and
that's
watch
totally
it, but
fine.
that's
No, I
about it.
really just I mostly wanted to get that kind of context of like this anxiety is real,
Mhm.
and it's not a fiction. It's not a conspiracy that the system is not delivering.
Right.
And I guess the more important aspect is this is not going to get better. Like this is the end of the American empire. I mean, shit, China and Russia are talking so that China can buy Russian oil so that their economy doesn't fucking collapse. And then
Mhm.
they're talking about trading oil in fucking the Chinese currency.
Ooh.
If that happens, it's the end of the fucking petrodollar.
Yeah, skipping right over the petrodollar.
Because if China says no, I'm only going to buy oil from Australia, which where they get a lot of coal, and some oil from Australia. The Chinese do. They get it from fucking wherever they can get it, right?
Right. Well, then we need a shit ton of it.
Yeah,
that's actually, and whenever we do our energy, economy,
talk about China.
Yeah. Oh no, I got into some Chinese stuff and their renewables and everything, and I'm just like, this is fascinating. And
but Chris had just said earlier. Sorry, finish your thought. I cut you off.
I was just they're managing to do amazing things that the rest of the world is unwilling to do because they don't want to be reliant on other countries. They're just like, fuck other countries. We're going to do everything we can to remain independent.
Well, and Chris Hedges said it at the beginning of the first clip, right? Is it like countries that don't have empires can invest in their people and in their future? We have not been able to do that, and God, is it evident? Because we don't even have fucking a high speed. Like, I get that, like, we're a big country. I don't think it's economically feasible and or like a good use of resources to try and connect this entire continent by high speed rail. However, you should at least have high speed rail from fucking Richmond to Boston.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that's where a fuck ton of people, and you should have a high speed rail connection that goes from Chicago across the Great Lakes, Ohio, Cleveland, all that shit, all the way to connect to the East Coast.
Yeah, or more locally between Los Angeles and San Francisco. We voted on that how many years ago, and it still hasn't became a thing.
And that was a huge political wedge for right wingers, right? We didn't even get into the fucking state of Jefferson. We just spent an hour and a half talking about fascism, and it could happen here, which is a popular podcast. Highly recommend them listen to that podcast on their episode on basically the Second American Civil War, and that's ultimately the end game of a lot of this anxiety and othering and all that shit is like inevitable. Like Head just said, it's going to fucking end up being violent. So like, we have the state of Jefferson here. Secessionist movement hates it. The train was just like, and they were right. Because they're like, why am I going to fucking pay more in taxes? And I ain't never going to fucking ride your train. And that's fair. And I think that ultimately, like, there's a question here that's beyond the scope of this conversation about how can we peacefully balkanize? Because this country is too fucking big. And without the empire supplying like a constant stream of fucking plunder from the global south, like we won't be able to hold it together. So we might as well just be like, hey, it was good while it happened. How can we break this into units that are more responsive to democratic process, and that can focus on developing their own internal economies while maintaining a network of trade amongst them? How can we do this peaceably and as intentionally as possible? Because it's going to happen whether we want it to or not. We might as well jump the shark, get ahead of the curve. I don't know, whatever the fucking you know what I mean. Yeah. But I think we're at time. Do you have a final closing thought?
No, just to agree, having driven the entire country very recently twice, and it is 14-hour days, 4 of them at 80 miles an hour. this country is fucking huge, and it is very disparate, socially and culturally, and you can just watch it happen as you travel across the country. So yeah, that it's too damn big.
Yeah, maybe we could even just do a whole episode, because there are people who've talked about that and done like animated maps and stuff like that. We could do a whole episode on just talking about how would we balkanize, like how would we divide the country? Because I've always joked about the Confederated Communes of California and Cascadia, which would basically be like parts of British Columbia and Washington and Oregon and part of California, with the southern part of California, the desert regions in the Los Angeles basin, be probably its own thing.
How would the taxes work is what always got me, because everybody talked about the state of Jefferson, and I'm just like, what is your tax base?
Oh, no, it's a fantasy. I've been in those circles because like I also believe in balkanization.
Yeah.
But like it's a fucking fantasy there. And because I literally was like, you realize that Kansas did this, right? And the voters like got pissed, like in local elected officials that had to deal with like trying to administer a state that had no funding had to raise taxes. So they tried this whole tax holiday bullshit in the land of the Koch brothers, right? In fucking Kansas. And it failed miserably. And the people were pissed. And it was a good experiment to have at that scale, because then a smaller number, sorry, they got hurt. I don't wish that upon them. It's not their fault. They don't deserve it. None of that fucking condescending bullshit shit libs say.
Yeah.
Like,
But
they don't
thanks for the
deserve it.
lesson.
But it provided a good example.
Yeah.
And that's what, having a states was supposed to provide, was everybody could do things a little bit different and then provide model policy. I prefer a confederal model and a less centralized state government. And maybe we can have that again once there's no more need for empire. Because remember, from the very beginning, this country was an empire.
Yeah.
It fucking indigenous genocide and pushed west with its manifest destiny. And as soon as we got to the San Francisco Bay, it was like Philippines, Cuba,
wow.
and all
that
of that
is
shit.
For me, that's what makes all the talk about China and their human rights violations and stuff. It's like, America, watch yourself, like, because you did the same damn thing, and maybe you need to analyze yourself.
Exact fucking thing I said about Ukraine too. It's like, well, it's not like the United States provides the best example of behaving rationally in the international system.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
Do as I say, not as I do doesn't fucking hold up when you got fucking nukes. Right.
No.
But that's a conversation for another day, my friend. At the end of American Empire, Liberty died.
With thunderous applause.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, thumbs up, whatever. I don't know.
I'll link
Click
your
the notification bell.
I'll link your what you call it, your TikTok.
Oh yeah, whatever, man. If people want to watch me fucking talk about weeds, I was talking about broadleaf plantain today.
Weeds and bugs, man.
Weeds and insects, my friend. Bugs are specifically a subset of the Hemiptera order. True bugs.
Okay. Good to know.
Anyway, much love, my friend. We'll talk to you next week, and hopefully somebody watches. Bye-bye.
I hope so. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.